Okay, I'm going to speak today on why in 2001, on 9/11, a major catastrophe happened. So if you all remember, it was just amazing to watch TV on that day. I had never seen skyscrapers collapse on themselves. I had never seen so many first responders die at one time. And it was filmed, of course, live. Every channel had it. We had helicopters, we had ground. And we also had a lot of people, mostly reporters, who were telling us why it was happening. And one of the reasons, it came out later, that it could have been a religious reaction. Another idea was it could have been a political reaction. And I remember listening to all these very wise and smart people telling me why this stuff happened. And none of it really satisfied me. There was always these missing pieces that they couldn't account for as to why it happened. So I thought to myself, well, I wonder what Buddhism has to say about why stuff happens. And if you know just a little bit about Buddhism, the Buddha only talked about two things in his entire ministry. He talked about why we suffer and all the factors that go into our suffering. And then he talked about how to end that suffering, which of course is the best part. But first you have to figure out why, and then you have to figure out how. So, in my search to find meaning to 9/11, I came across a wonderful model. It's called the 5 Niyamas. Why stuff happens. And it allowed me to investigate and come to a place of acceptance with why stuff happens in the world. Not just 9/11, but anything. Anything at all. Earthquakes in Italy, why did that happen? You know? Earthquakes in Oklahoma, we sort of know why that happened. Could have been fracking. But it goes on and on. All the stuff, why does all this stuff happen? So we have the 5 niyamas, and the first niyama is about the law of physical matter. The law of physical matter. So if you have a sun, and if you have some planets, they oftentimes orbit around the sun, and that would be a law of physical matter. You can put things into orbit. You can prove that to be true. Science has a lot to say about the law of physical matter. If we have a tsunami, we can look to science again and see perhaps there was an earthquake and we had a platelet shift, and that affected the ocean, and the ocean went onto the shore, and if you happened to be on the shore when the tsunami hit, you would die. I can remember in Thailand when they had a big tsunami, and I can remember reading online a Christian saying, it's God's will. A Buddhist is saying, it's karma. But most people didn't go and say, well, maybe it's just these platelets shifting. And they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there was no intention behind that action. Nobody or nothing meant it to happen in a negative way and kill people. It happened, people died. Okay, that's hard to accept. We would like to think everything has an intention. In Buddhism, it's not necessarily so. Some stuff just happens. So the laws of physical matter can give us an idea of why certain things happen. Now we go into the law of living matter. We call this biology. We have genes and chromosomes. And if you think about the people that committed the 9/11 act, a lot of them came from the Middle East, if not all of them. So would the second niyama have something to do with why that stuff happened? Well, it did have something to do, it seems to me, as to why those people came from the Middle East. Because their parents came from the Middle East. And maybe their grandparents. And maybe their great-great-grandparents. And nobody moved very far. They didn't travel to Ireland or England or America. They sort of stayed there. And maybe went 100 miles, 300 miles from where they were born. If they had had different genes and chromosomes, they would have had different parents. And those parents may have been living someplace else. So we can look at, again, the tsunami and say, why did all those people die? And it had something to do with their biology and the genes and chromosomes and where they came from, along with the law of matter, nature. Okay, so now we got two things to work with. What I like about this model is it's never one thing. And if it's only one thing, it's problematic. Because then we can point and say, it's God's doing. Something is wrong. He didn't like something. I love it when they call him he. Because I'm not sure if it's a he, she, and it, if it exists or doesn't exist. But for the time being, we'll say, he wanted it to happen. The Buddhist would say, it's karma, one thing. It's only karma. They had bad karma. Lifetime after lifetime, they were reaping, producing, creating their karma for this one moment. You know, and you go, whoa, it's got to be karma. It's not. It's never, ever one thing in Buddhism. Buddhism doesn't go to the Great One. Buddhism doesn't say the ultimate reality is one, which I really like. Buddhism says the ultimate reality is many connected, which is very Hindu. There is no ultimate God, according to Buddhism. There is a hierarchy of gods, small g, s. Many gods. If you read the early suttas in Pali, you'll find that the Buddha taught the gods how to end their suffering. Because even the gods, small g, s, suffered because they had attachment, they had aversion. So it's never the big God, it's never the ultimate karma, it's always at least 5 things that are interconnected and interdependent, causing stuff to happen. Number 3, karma. Karma is the moral aspect of why things happen. Karma is the moral aspect of why things happen. And there's a lot of confusion about what karma is. To put it simply, karma is everything you think, everything you say, everything you do. That's karma. Simple, plain, easy to understand if you keep it there. It's not what goes around comes around. That's not karma. Buddhism has karma, vipaka, cause, consequence. So we have karma is the cause, vipaka is the consequence. The cause could be putting your finger in a fire. The consequence could be, wow, that really hurts. Yeah, the karma could be, I'm driving 100 miles an hour. And now, all of a sudden, there is a stop sign. The consequence could be, I ran through the stop sign, caused an accident, and many people got hurt. It is said that if you want to kill something, you'll not reap the total consequences if you haven't followed through. First, there is the intention to kill. I'm going to kill that cockroach. It's not supposed to be here. I don't want him as a roommate. then we think up an incredible way of killing him. We plan it out. We might have little bits of food to encourage him to come towards us. We might have a glass or a hammer, and we're going to kill this guy. Then we follow through, and then we kill it, and the plan worked. And then we have great joy and happiness in the fact that we killed the cockroach. At that point, karma is complete. At that point, there will be a consequence. Why will there be a consequence? Because it is always wrong to kill according to Buddhism. There is never a good reason to kill. But sometimes it is necessary. And this is the paradox of ultimate reality. Sometimes it's necessary. I remember taking a class with Dr. Ratnasara. We're at Dharma Vijaya Buddhist Vihara. There was a young man who had been recently married within a year. And he brought up the question to Dr. Ratnasara. He said, my understanding of karma is this. It is always wrong to kill. If we are at home, somebody breaks through the front door and wants to kill my wife, I should let him because that's her karma. And Dr. Ratnasara just chuckled. He just laughed. He said, no. He said, when you got married, you swore to protect and serve your wife. That trumps karma. That trumps the natural order of things. Your job now is to protect your wife from being killed. Even if it is her karma, you need to change her consequences by what you do. And I thought, that is really just fascinating, because sometimes in the commitment we make to our life, the lives of others, and to the world, we will kill, which is why we have war. Now, I have heard there are certain countries in the world where Buddhist monks live and practice and get enlightened. But if their country is attacked, some of the Buddhist monks will take off their robes, give back their ordination, fight in the army to protect their country, and when their service is over, then they will take back their robes and continue their life. Now, I was just baffled. How could anybody do that if they understood the Dharma? How could anybody join the military service to kill if they understood that it's always wrong to kill? And then I had an insight. It was this, that we are born in certain countries and we become Americans or Canadians or Mexicans. Then as a male or female, Canadian, American, or Mexican, we grow, we begin to understand the world intellectually, and we have an obligation to protect our country because that's how we've been brought up. We have cultural literacy. We understand what America is and what it means to be an American. We understand what a Canadian is and what it means to be a Canadian. And if that is violated by another country, we need to stand firm and say, no, this is how we want to live. This is how we expect to live, and we will fight to make that happen. So as human, we're human first, we're American second, and we're Buddhist third, and maybe fourth, we're Democrat. You can keep adding things. When does it change? It changes when you achieve nirvana. When you achieve nirvana, you are Buddhist first. You are free first. You are enlightened first. Which means you may or may not fight for your country at that point. If you're free, you belong to no country. If you're free, you belong to no man or woman. The Dharma, the ultimate freedom, is nirvana, and it is the end of suffering. So we do a lot of things because we suffer. And because we feel if we do things differently, we'll suffer less. And ultimately, if we do things differently, we'll not suffer at all. So karma, cause, vipaka, consequence, karma, everything you think, say, and do. Now, thought karma has the least value. It has the least consequence. And all those thoughts we've had our whole life that have never manifested in speech or action have little consequence. Sometimes the thoughts prevent you from sleeping. That's your consequence. But nobody knows why you didn't get a good night's sleep. Even you may not realize why you didn't get a good night's sleep. Speech is the next level of karma, and it has more value and more potential for consequence. And literally, wars have been started because of words. And wars have been ended because of words. A treaty, words on paper, lines. When you see these consequences, you understand how powerful karma can be. And then the karma with the most consequence is our action karma. Once our intention turns into activity, there is soon to be a consequence. Now it could be a pleasant consequence, or it could be an unpleasant consequence. A lot of times we don't know because we don't really understand where the intention is coming from. If you want to understand the intention, you need to meditate. You need to see where it starts. And a simple way of understanding that, it can start with greed, it can start with hatred, it can start with delusion. If that's the case, the consequences will be uncomfortable. If instead the intention starts with generosity, compassion, or wisdom, the consequence can be favorable. It can be a pleasant consequence. So in our meditation, oftentimes we see our thoughts arise, exist, and pass away. Arise, exist, and pass away. And in doing that, we get a better idea of what kind of thought it is and where it came from. Now, I've used this before, but I'll use it again because it's one of my favorite. Every couple days I go to Food for Less to buy cat food because they have the best prices. Sometimes I find myself on the bakery aisle. Now, they brought back Hostess cupcakes. They're a little bit smaller, they're individually wrapped, and you can get 8 in a box, sometimes for under $2. And I say to myself, that's what I want. I want that box of 8 Hostess cupcakes, individually wrapped. And then I say to myself, where does that thought come from? Is that a thought of generosity? Do I just simply want to give my money to the supermarket? Or is it a thought of greed? I'll have 8 all to myself and not share it with anybody. Well, generally speaking, I buy the 8 anyway, even though it's a thought of greed, and have a wonderful time eating them. But we can see, if we pay attention in any situation, where these thoughts start and what category they fall into. Karma is very important. There is also collective karma, national karma, world karma. Right now we're working on the environment. We're all in this together. And everybody that has a good intention and a good speech and good action will make a difference in the environment. So karma can be individual, it can be collective. The fourth niyama is probably the most difficult to understand because it deals with ultimate reality, which tends to be the foundation of our relative reality. Now, Buddhism, we have 2 ways of looking at the world, at our experience of the world. We have the relative, we have the ultimate. We have mind and body, we have community, we have cars. Relative reality. Ultimate reality. All things are interconnected and interdependent. Ultimate reality is the basis for relative reality. To give you an example of ultimate reality in the Mahayana tradition, we have something called shunyata. Shunyata is emptiness. All things are empty. Early Buddhism has anatta. Nothing exists independently. There is no self or soul. It stands apart. So, if all things are empty, what do we see? We see things that are connected because of our delusion. We see things that we think are permanent that are constantly in flux. We see things that we think will bring us happiness, and we attach. We see things that we think will bring us unhappiness, and we have aversion. And all the while we're trying to balance our life out using our relative reality that was placed there because of education and situation and personal experience. And we use this as a filter to name and use everything in our life. But below that is this ultimate reality, and the fourth niyama deals with the building blocks of ultimate reality. And if you've ever read any Buddhist psychology, you'll find that there are many lists, the Abhidharma, there are many lists that will allow you to build relative reality out of ultimate reality. 7 books, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty boring to read, unless you're a monk. The fifth and most important niyama of why things happen is mind. Mind. We create the world moment by moment according to the Buddha. Everything in this world exists in this fathom-long body, from fingertip to fingertip. Everything in the world exists in this fathom-long body. It took me a while to fully appreciate what he was saying when he said that. Imagine yourself in a spacesuit, and you can't take it off or you'll die. And you have a place for your eyes to see, and your ears to hear, and your nose to smell, and your tongue to taste. And it's thin enough that your body can feel. And that's sort of what we are. We have these sense doors that bring in information from whatever is out there, and we use that information to create the story of our life. We see things as independent, and we see things as living 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. But the ultimate reality behind that seeing is that nothing lives any longer than this moment. There's no duration. Time is something we use to understand why there's a beginning and why there's an end. But according to Buddhism, there is no beginning, there is no end. It's always been here and always will be here, whatever it is. And we're interpreting it, and we're trying to understand it, and we're trying to give it meaning, and then we die. And do we really die? Well, according to Buddhism, no. We just sort of transfer into different shapes and times and energy patterns, and we continue on and on and on. But this thing we call ego and self, this place that we now sit in, is made up. And each one is making it up in their own special way. None of us have had the same experiences or education. Some of us are older and some of us are younger. So we interpret this reality in our own unique way. And if somebody tells you how to live, be cautious. Because nobody has ever lived your life before. You are the first person to live your life. It is totally unique and totally without instructions. And somehow we make our way through and continue to exist and live relatively comfortable because we are drawn to pleasure and away from pain. We have attachment and we have aversion. So let me tell you how the Buddha said it works for a human being. He says we have 5 component parts. We have 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. But because the fifth niyama is dealing with mind, we're not going to talk about form right away. We're going to talk about number 1, sensation. The Buddha said we have 3 sensations. We have pleasant sensation, unpleasant sensation, and neutral sensation. And as a human being, we are drawn to the pleasant and away from the unpleasant, and pay no attention at all to neutral or indifferent. It doesn't catch our attention in the same way pleasure or pain does. Once we've been attracted to either pleasure or pain, we rely on our consciousness to be the building blocks of our experience. We have to have a rudimentary consciousness in order to be aware. And some of us are aware at different levels. But awareness is necessary to have sensation. We need to be aware of the sensation because it will be the next activity, and that will be perception. So we have sensation, we have consciousness, and now we have perception. Perception, simply put, is the naming quality that we all have because of experience and education. That some of us have huge vocabularies, 20,000 words, 30,000 words. And this enables us to name the world around us and use the objects in it to our advantage. Now, grade school, we're taught how to read. We're taught basic arithmetic. High school, we go into geometry and algebra and history and business and all sorts of fascinating things. And we just keep becoming more and more who we are. Then we get to college, which is the experts. They really fine-tune their intellectual understanding about certain things. And hopefully get that degree and make a living because it's what they know that will give them in the door. And then once they're in the door, it's what they do. Then we have the volitional activity of doing stuff. See, we can name it, but if we simply name it, we don't do anything with it until we have an activity. And the activity allows us to use what we've named. So if we have a chair and we're tired, we can name the chair, realize because of past experiences with the chair that it could be comfortable to sit in, and we could rest and get back our energy. And then the volitional activity is to go over to the chair and sit down. And then a pleasant sensation happens, and then you don't want to move for a while. So what are the 5 aggregates? Form, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. A rudimentary consciousness that will allow us to experience sensation, whether it be pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, which we normally don't experience. Perception, which is the naming quality and the understanding quality of what's going on around us and what we need to do to make it happen. And then we have the volitional activity, which is doing it. So if you want to sit down in a chair, you've got to sit down in a chair. If you want to walk out the door, first you have to know that's a door, what it's used for, how to open it and close it. Then you got to walk out the door or walk in the door. And we take all this stuff for granted. But the Buddha, in his wisdom, sort of broke it down like that. And why would he break it down like that? Why isn't there Jungian psychology and Freudian psychology and all these other things? Because those things are there to make you a better human being, to make you better adjusted, to make you normal. But Buddhism isn't about making you normal. Buddhism is making you more than normal. Buddhism is making you transcendent. Buddhism will allow you to be in every situation and not suffer. And eventually you'll be free. None of the psychologies are based on being free. They're based on being a better you. That's a good place to start. If you're a better you, Buddhism is much easier to practice and understand, because you're starting in a good place. If you still need work on being you, Buddhism may or may not be useful. If somebody's having a really bad psychological time and they want to meditate, I usually sort of hope they don't. Discourage them. Because it might make their mental attitudes worse rather than better. Maybe they need a little therapy first to get those issues resolved. Then you come to meditation. Then you come to Buddhism. Then it allows you to get to that transcendent place of not suffering. But you also have the 5 precepts, which while you're working on your mind becoming normal, quote, you can be working on your speech and action with the 5 precepts to reduce your suffering right now, today. Not to kill, not to steal, no sexual misconduct, not to lie, not to consume intoxicants. So people say to me, should my children meditate? I say, I don't know if it's important for children to meditate, but it's very important for children to learn and practice the 5 precepts. And then when their mind starts to become more developed, when they start to have all those perceptions of what experience of life and what their experience is, then meditation can help resolve some of the issues and become a transcendent vehicle to end suffering completely. So now we have mind in this model of the 5 niyamas, and we see how powerful mind is, because our whole life is defined by what our mind thinks it is. The Buddha had an empirical perspective. The Buddha said, this is how I experience life. He didn't say this is how life is in a scientific way. He said, this is how I've come to experience life, and I see clearly why humans suffer, and I see clearly how they can end their suffering. And let me tell you what I have come to understand as truth. It's not a theory with the Buddha. It's what we can do starting today to make a difference in our life, in the way we experience our life. And that will then translate into the lives of others as we come in contact with them. We don't ever have to tell them anything about Buddhism to make their life better. We just have to do Buddhism on an individual basis. And their life becomes better as well. So when I look at 9/11 and I see the horror of what occurred, I think to the 5 niyamas, the 5 aspects of why things happen, and I try to apply 1 through 5 to the situation. And in this situation, maybe 3 or 4 are applicable. Maybe not all of them. Maybe only 2 or 3 are applicable. But it's never just one, and it allows the intellect. It doesn't allow the heart, that's where our practice comes in, but it allows the intellect to start to feel comfortable and come to a place of acceptance with this world we call samsara. Samsara is the world where birth and death occur, every moment of every day. And here we are. It doesn't just happen on 9/11. It happens every day, in every moment, birth and death. And in between birth and death, there's growth and decay. Human life, at its basic level, can be pretty hard to accept, because it doesn't sound like it has a lot of happiness or fulfillment connected to it. And it doesn't. We as humans give it value, we give it meaning. Our life can be anything we want it to be because it's nothing to begin with. If we're not who we think we are, we have the ability to be anything. Rather than being a negative, it's a positive. You're in charge of building your life. And if you build your life with Buddhism, it will be a life filled with happiness, peace, and ultimately freedom. Thank you for listening. I hope what I said had meaning and value. Are there any questions about what I've said, or any comments on what I've said? Yeah.
Yes. Today is September 11. So I've been through the years. I've been seeing a lot of or listening different report about the 9/11. Where we in the puzzle of the event of the 9/11 tragic event, where we put a word that it says that it was made, that it was not really what it was seen to the world, that there was something else, that it was like it was not like the airplane fell down, hit the tower, but it was a complot. Something else was that. Where we can put that situation in a reality that most of us perceive, how we can understand in Buddhism's term that situation that is a lie, that what happened, and know the reality that our eyes can see, how we can see in the context of Buddhism this situation.
Got it. Conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theory, yes.
We all love those. And they're all over the place, especially on the internet. A Buddhist might say, and a meditator surely would say, all those conspiracy theories are thinking. That's all. Just a bunch of thoughts that have turned out to be words. Okay? So what's the reality of 9/11? What's the underlying reality of 9/11? The underlying reality of 9/11 is sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And the last one, thinking. So we have thinking. But thinking came because we had the sense door experience of watching it, hearing it. We couldn't feel it because it was on television. If we were there, we could feel it. And that's it. So, the question is, what do you want to think? Is there any ultimate truth in thinking? No. There is relative truth. There is consensus. If enough people think the same thing, it becomes truth or false. Okay? So, what do you want to think? We know what the experience was. And in meditation, the idea is to come to your senses and leave your mind behind. Lose your mind. Come to your senses and lose your mind. Just for 20 minutes. How does it feel? How does it sound? How does it look? How does it smell? How does it taste? That's a meditation experience. You add thinking, it's a good experience, it's a bad experience. Why am I doing it? I could be doing something else. Isn't football on right now? Why am I sitting here? Thinking. We create the world around us. Nothing exists out there. Remember the Buddha said, our entire world exists in this fathom-long body. We bring all these concepts in. We give them the value of truth or false, and then we go, wow, it's a conspiracy. We need to do something. Let's have another war. Let's kill some more people because we're right. You know? That's how it all goes. So, we hold everything a little lighter. We hold the truth a little lighter. We hold things that aren't true a little lighter. And we just look at it and go, wow, it is so amazing to be a human being. Because a monkey doesn't know truth. A cat doesn't know truth. But we seem to have a strong desire to know it, to understand it, and claim it as ours. Truth. So I hear all the theories, and what do? I have a cup of coffee. And then I go to the next thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Let me get that.
Quick question. You mentioned that when we die, actually the energy doesn't die, it transfers. Where does it transfer? You mentioned other things. My question is, where does it transfer? Is it like a karma thing that it transfers, or how do we know where is it going to go, or next step, or next?
Yeah, we don't know. We hope it's going to go to a nice place, but we don't know.
It's not a karma thing, or
It's very much a karma thing. It's not a soul thing. It's not a self thing. It's a karma thing. So all the things we've thought about, talked about, and done has created energy in the world. We've taken this neutral energy, and with our thinking, speaking, and acting, we have turned it into a moral energy of skillful or unskillful, good or bad. That energy, when we die, doesn't go with us. It continues into the next lifetime. It is said when a man and a woman come together and have sex, that there is this gandhava, this karmic energy just waiting. And it knows when you're having sex. And the only way a human being can start is to have a sperm, an egg, and karma. Then it's complete, then life begins in the womb. Then, all through the next life, we do good things and bad things and stupid things and wonderful things, and it changes our karma, because the energy is always changing, and then that's reborn. But in each time it's reborn, we don't get to go. Because we're only here now. We don't live in the future, we don't live in the past, we only here now. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, very interesting.
That's what they say. Now, whether that's the truth, I'll let you decide. Thank you. Nicholas.
Suffering can, sometimes I think that the idea of, what's interesting to me about Buddhism is the idea that one of the goals is to end suffering, or at least that's what it seems like to me. But I also think there's a value in suffering, based on what you even spoke. There's pleasure and pain, and that's part of the two polarities. And for some people's pain is other people's pleasure, and vice versa. So is there a value in suffering?
I'm talking about pain, though, talking about suffering.
Okay, so
Suffering
maybe
is
that's
different
the
than pain.
distinction. But is there a value in suffering, and is there a danger of attaching to trying to end suffering? Like, can that become its own attachment?
Yes. Number one, there is no value in suffering. There is nothing good about suffering. You don't become a better person because you suffer. What is suffering? Suffering happens when you want things to be different than they are. That's it. Now, pain, you may become stoic and be able to endure great pain, which would be good if you're giving birth. Doesn't apply to you, though. But in suffering, no, there's nothing good about suffering. The paradox, the irony is, for a Buddhist, we want to end our suffering. That's an attachment. That's a drive. That's a goal. And because we have those three things, we'll never end our suffering. So, you need to start on the path with the intention to end your suffering. in some way along the path you need to not care any longer whether you succeed or not succeed, whether you end your suffering or don't end your suffering. You just simply practice day by day, week by week, month by month, with no intention of achieving the end of suffering. And then you got a shot. When you forget why you're doing it, then it works.
Well, without suffering, you might not be motivated to maybe make a positive change. Or
If you're not suffering, then there's no reason to practice Buddhism.
Right. So there is that value in the sense without suffering.
I've never met anybody who's not suffering. So, and to make a relative, we got to go, to make a relative example, when you want to find a girlfriend. Okay, Nicholas, you're looking through the phone book, you're looking on, you know, and you can just, I need to have a girlfriend. Nothing. Nothing. And then the one day when you give up and say, it's not for me, I'll never have a girlfriend, there she is! So it works like that, even in meditation. Thank you, Nicholas.